Welcome everyone to this episode of the Services Ops podcast presented by Probus. We are here to dig into the people, process, and technology that drive successful services business. My name is Chris Souza. I am head of marketing at Probus, and as always, with our co-host, co-founder, and CEO of Probus, Mahesh Baxi. Good day, Mahesh. How are you doing?
Doing good. Super excited. This is our first podcast with an amazing guest here. So super excited about that.
An absolutely amazing guest. So let's talk about what's coming for this podcast. So this episode, we have a very special guest, a luminary in the services industry, an esteemed PSA principal in NetSuite, Joe Longo. Joe, thank you. Thank you for coming.
Hi, good to see you guys. I can't wait to meet this guest. Is he coming on?
Okay. The esteemed one is coming. Yeah.
Hi guys, good meeting you. Looking forward to it as well.
Yeah, we're really excited about this one because we have a very, very special episode. I think if you know anything about Joe and anything about Mahesh, they got many, many amazing years of experiences in the services industry, scaling services organizations, leading technologies, all the things that you want to have insight from. And in this episode, we're going to be digging really deep into PSA strategies, as well as strategies to scale professional services function. So we're going to get straight into this. And first, let's start with Joe. So Joe, for those who don't know who you are, let's just learn a little bit more about you before we get started. Right? Let's hear some of those fun facts about Joe Longo.
Okay, well, I'll try and condense it. Accent's Australian, born and raised in Australia. Parents were Italian, so my first language was Italian. And I've lived in the US now for about 30 years. I'm a US citizen. So my fun fact is when I watch the Olympic Games, I'm not sure which team to root for, the Australians, the Italians, or the Americans. If you want to know more about me, I'm on Strava. I'm a big-time cyclist. You can find me on Strava. Best fun fact about that is my longest ride in one day is 150 miles and I survived. How's that?
It's amazing. It's a very long distance.
Presto, as always.
Very fun. I can almost picture the big Australian-US swimming rivalry back in, I think it was Athens. You must have been just torn apart.
That is still going on. No, I pretty much lean to the mother country when it comes to swimming.
There we go. Okay. Awesome. And how about your career, Joe? Tell the audience a little bit about how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, let me jump into that. That's kind of the payload for this this podcast. It's interesting. My degree is in computer science, and I have a postgraduate diploma in digital communications, which really threw me into the networking side of things. Loved it. Loved the computer science side, the programming side. So started life as a programmer. So I'll jump ahead. At some point, I got to lead a group of customer-facing engineers. About 40 of them. I was the director of this group, and that's how I got into professional services. It went from engineering services to professional services. And the reason I bring this up, just to jump straight into it, when I got into professional services quite a while ago, what I realized was there's no formal training. So you look around the other executives in the room. There's the finance people. Guess what? They've got accounting backgrounds, accounting degrees, got MBAs. I look at the engineering folks, developing a product. Same things for them. They've got degrees. Marketing people have lots of training. Even salespeople have great training. May not be a formal degree, but there's great training on strategic selling. My favorite book for about selling is the Challenge of Salesman. For people that don't like books about selling, that's a great book to read.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to professional services, I was told, here, go cut down trees, and figure it out. And I look around today and it's still the same. So that's my career path to answer your question. But I think it's relevant to our discussion today and some of the lessons we learn and some of the mistakes people make when they come into this, because what's their background? Where did they come from? Were they an engineer that they just want to find a place for? So I think it's quite relevant.
Yeah.
What would you say, Mahesh? Is that accurate?
Absolutely accurate. And, and that's the exciting part, right? I mean, we have been around for a long time. And, in the last episode, I talked about 3 decades and how we see the evolution of systems, if you will, and how the first decade was solving all of this back end problems. Second decade was solving all about the front office problems. And then a time came when people realized like, oh, well, I have a fantastic front office, I have a fantastic back office, and what about the middle office, which is where all the fun stuff is happening, and all of that was happening manual. So similar to that, I think if 30 years of our my career in professional services, Joe, I think if I were to say those 3 decades, I think one thing that has remained common is how difficult it is to execute services for customers, no matter which industry, what company, and which domain you are in. And that has not changed. And we are here to talk about what's ahead and how some of those game-changing things can happen in the coming decade.
That's
True,
great.
yeah, it's a common theme. Definitely, you're servicing customers, but the environment changes. Just to throw some things in the 90s, it was all about on-prem and margins because your company's going to be public and your services had to have a positive margin. Then the 2000s, it becomes hosted applications, right, in the cloud. Now the services aren't quite that important, but yes, they are, but they don't have to make money because we're going to make money over there. So the job of a professional services executive has morphed. In the end, it's being successful with the customer so they get their return on investment, but the parameters that the executive is working on is changing. Again, my point is, where does that executive get that training? Somebody just comes down from the board meeting and says, look, here's what we've decided. We want 20% margin or we don't. Go
Right.
figure it out.
Right. Absolutely true. Absolutely true.
Well, that's why we have the Services Ops podcast, right? So we can start bringing some advice and insight to the masses about this just lack of general training. So Joe, you guys already started talking about it. Let's just go ahead and think about 30 years has brought you all to this place where we are today, and now we're in this year. We're in 2024. Everything is changing, economies, whatever it's going to be. These are all things leaders need to think about. So what are some of the trends you are seeing today, either that are challenges or opportunities that our audience should be aware of? Let's go ahead and start with Joe.
Well, what I saw last year, there was paralysis in the services industry because there was a perception of the economy was not going to go well. There was definitely, I call that a perception because I think now people are understanding, it's not actually not going to go well. It's actually maybe growing. So last year, the trend was do what you can with the resources you have. And why? Because services resources are some of the most expensive resources in the company. There's very little hiring going on. Services companies were really concerned about the revenue and the headcount, and they were there was paralysis. They weren't really moving anywhere, weren't evolving. Now what's happened, and I see this in my job, is that they're seeing, oh my God, the pipeline is growing dramatically, and we stopped interviewing last year. I know that for a fact. I know people in the industry. Now they can't move fast enough. And they're concerned now about doing the right hiring, getting the right people and getting them in time. So the trend is how can we grow and scale with the limited time that we have and not hold back our company?
And to add to that, I think you're absolutely spot on. But and to add to that, I think a couple of other trends. We talked about 3 decades, but I think what has transpired in those 3 decades and how lots and lots of SaaS product companies have come about to solve a point problem. But if you are thinking of end-to-end transformation of your processes, or if you are thinking of a process like lead to cash, for example, right? You are no longer operating in silos, no matter what point solution you are providing. If I take example of PSA, right? PSA, it cannot no longer be or thought of as a siloed solution. What we do at Provis, services quoting, it's no longer a siloed solution. So what all of that means is, if you're providing services to your customers, or if you are a customer consuming or wanting to consume services, the world that you are in unfortunately or fortunately, is no longer a disconnected experience. What that means is you cannot only focus on your product or your services. You have to be aware of the entire environment that you are dealing with. And which is where the consuming services or delivering services has become more and more complex, because back in the days you were kind of siloed, like you said, on-prem. Hey, my software is done, installed, configured, and I'm walking away. No longer true. If you talk about lead to cash, if you're providing like us services quoting, we have to be aware of CRM, we have to be aware of opportunity, we have to be aware of your account and how that's managed, we have to be aware of how your opportunity forecasting works, we have to be aware of how the backend fulfillment systems like PSAs are going to consume this data, how they are going to track it, what and how we can bring that in. So if you ask me, this is a education slash, the courageous leaders in the services now fast tracking this to say, okay, it's not about me giving 5 kinds of services, because it's a losing proposition. No matter how you estimate, no matter how you provide that quote and proposal, which is going to get discounted no matter what you do, you can no longer be in charge of your destiny if you continue to do the business the way you have been doing in the past decade. And that will change. That is changing. We talk to a lot of courageous leaders like yourself, Joe, and we see that trend that, the courageous leaders do want to bring in a change which impacts people, process, technology to make that entire journey better, not just for me as a service leader, but for my customers. And that, I think, is going to transform this decade.
Yeah, I'm definitely seeing that. And for the people that are not aware, I'm in the selling side of things. I work for NetSuite and I sell a PSA, and my customers were my peers. And yes, they come armed with, hey, what's the anatomy of my corporate applications? And I don't want a smokestack PSA. I want something that's connected. A really good example. I want to connect my PSA to Jira. It's very, very common, right, for collaboration. Everybody wants to connect it to their CRM. They understand that. And it goes on and on and on. You can talk about these. And I will say to listeners, when you're looking at anything, and I've learned this through my career, when you're looking at a solution that is out there and is unconnected, it's very quickly regarded in that company as the legacy system. It doesn't do anything to anything else. What is your central system, whether it's the CRM or the ERP? That's the one that's connected to everything. Your thing over there. So watch out for that. And if you find yourself, with device, if you find yourself providing a solution and it's somehow sitting on an island, but ask yourself why. That could be a bit of a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine as a courageous leader, the last thing you want to do is be associated with the legacy way of doing things, right? Especially like you just talked about, there's changes all over the place. There's changes in the economy and demand for services. Obviously, the supply of resources is constrained with that increased demand. And what you guys just talked about, connecting these systems. How should leaders think about the balance of, oh no, the pipeline is bigger than we thought it was going to be. Hire, onboard, get them plugged in with, wait a minute, we also see the future and we've got, we'll call it legacy systems in place. How should, in this exact moment in time, leaders be balancing those two priorities?
So I'll talk about some stories. I mean, as you know, I used to work for a company called Aptus, and amazing journey, a tremendous growth over the years. And that tremendous growth brings all the challenges that you can imagine, especially, me running customer success and professional services. We were growing leaps and bounds. We were closing, 50, 55 new logos every quarter. We were dealing with a domain that was not so mature as it is now, which is quote to cash. And you do this, you go through this scope discovery of sorts, and you try to produce so-called proposal for your customers. And of course, that's happening on Excel spreadsheets. And the first question that anyone would have after going through the scope discovery and coming up with like, oh, well, it's going to take 1,000 hours or 10,000 hours, and it's going to take $300,000 or whatever the case might be. The first question is, oh, that's too high. Right?
That's not a question. Is that a
Yeah,
question?
a statement. It's more of a statement like, oh, that's too high.
Right.
Okay, so where do you go from there?
Yeah.
Like, okay, do you want to just discount the heck out of it? Do you want to do further discovery? Do you want to reduce the scope? Do you want to put different kind of resource structure? What are the options? The options, back then was zero, because you had no option but to say, well, this is what we think it is. And there's no way to prove right or wrong because you did not have any historical data whatsoever. And then ultimately it's left to someone either higher up or a sales team to take the charge and say, well, okay, services, we are going to discount, sorry, but we want to make the other deal happen. And you are left with, what you are handed with is the two most dangerous things. One, you are handed off with a deal with a margin that's impossible to achieve to start. But more dangerous to that is you are handed with a deal where you are supposed to keep your customers happy while you know that the foundation of your customer happiness is the scope, which you don't have well defined. And you know that your first week, you are going to bring up the topic called change order, and that's not going to start well for your customers. And so I think that is the world, unfortunately, we lived in for a while. And I think 90% of the services leaders still live in that world. But and that's what is going to drive the change, where you get to a point where everyone is facing the problem, and then the problem kind of automatically explodes. And now everyone is kind of struggling to make it more systematic and find a solution, which I think is if you ask me, 2024 and next 2 years, that's what it's going to be about.
Well, there's the corollary to that. Let me build on that, and I'll also get back to what Chris was asking. So the corollary to that is, I've always said, look, if we as a corporation decide that we want to make a loss on our services because of the strategic intent or a land grab, it's fine, as long as we all agree. However, here's what happens. You got two projects. Let's just say it's two. This one is making a decent margin. This is your loss leader because you want to get market share. As you go through it over the weeks and months of that project, guess which one gets the attention and which one nobody wants to help you. Nobody wants to be associated with the one that's losing money. And in the end, they start forgetting that that's what you agreed to. And now, as a services leader, you're constantly battling for attention when you've got escalations in engineering and shortcomings and so forth. So it's just not healthy at all. So the way we deal with it, Mahesh, is this is my professional tip. I'm selling, I'm in sales. We don't just throw a price out. We get our quotation tool, we put it in a very nice, presentable format, and we walk the customer through line by line. And it's like, okay, you don't like it? Which one of these lines would you like to take out, right? So some of our customers may be listening, they may be laughing, but it's very justifiable to say, this is how we came up with that. How can I help you at that point?
Right.
With respect to Chris, you were asking the question. I do want to answer that because I've got horror stories, but I want to turn it into what I use as a real selling tool. Yeah, the company is growing. I see this pipeline. My VP of sales comes into the room. I've got 6 deals going to close this Friday. You better be ready to get started. I need to go to the sales CEO. Hey, I need another X people. She says, no, you're okay. Right? So what do you do, right? So there can be a lot of tension created in the company. Well, for one thing, you need a resource management tool, which we happen to have. It's called Open Air. It's fantastic. It tells me what people are doing today, what skills I need going forward. It tells me who's sitting on the bench, who's not, working on shelf for things. So you need that data. You can't do it on a spreadsheet. And I talk about this all the time. I gave a lecture at the TSIA conference last year about the need for automated resource management. But let me get to the selling point of this. What I say to the sales guys is, when I was a practitioner, was I can't start at Monday, and you better tell your customer if you don't sign that deal this month, this quarter, we're not going to start till July. So you go back and you use that if you're serious. And I'm not making this up. In that company, the culture just built on that because it was projecting success. We have a lot of deals, Mr. Gus. I really wanted you to get there. And we're not making this up, right? Everybody will say I got a lot, but they had it with a lot of justification behind them. And it would convince customers, look, we need to work on this timeline so that we all stay sane. So that's how I turned it around in my case. And I was really proud of the fact that the sales team was right behind me on that. And then I was able to do the scheduling, the resourcing without having to hire 30 more people.
Yeah, yeah. The
Yeah.
idea of this whole thing, Joe, is very rarely anyone has ill intentions, right? Everyone wants to make customers successful, but everyone is measured and working in a different kind of environments, or in some cases siloed environments, in some cases conflicting objective measures, right? And that creates that conflict that you are talking about, which is very rarely, or I don't think I've ever seen or worked for an organization where each group is not trying to make customers successful. Everyone wants to do it. It's just that the sales has a different way to do it, and marketing has a different way to do it, and services has a different way to do it, customer support has different way to do it, and all of them are measured differently, right? Back then, we could have done it back then too, but now I see more and more companies putting all of those groups onto very, very crisp, objectively measurable outcomes, and a consistent one, so that everyone kind of works together with one goal, which is make customers successful.
Yeah, exactly right. And that leads to visibility, everyone being able to see it. I lived in my PSA, and I would put the sales guys in the PSA. They could see their project, they could see the billing. I even got them to approve it. Oh my God, that just got rid of so much friction. It was like, yeah, and they were my champions. Totally agree.
That's huge. That's huge. And what I liked what you said, Joe, that bit of communication with the sales team, right? You've got this macro factor pushing against your services organization, which is there's high demand coming in. And what your story touched on three core things that we're very passionate here on the podcast: the people, process, and technology. Being able to go to your service leaders, your sales leaders, and say, one, I see the pipeline. So is your technology and your systems in place so that you as a services leader are able to understand the pipeline in time that you can make resourcing decisions? So that's one, right? There's that technology in the system. Two, do you have the people and the relationships in place where you can go to the sales leaders and say, whoa there, if we do this all on Friday, we're going to have unhappy customers. And then three, the process, those avenues of communication, the okay, we actually can't get this done in time, so how are we going to stretch these deals out or communicate that to the customers? So like in one simple, small little story, three big points of emphasis that we really push on our audience to really think about in their services operations. Like that is a great example of how you run a good services organization, a great services organization. All right. Well, that's a great little intro to Joe and Mahesh and sort of what's happening, what we're seeing today. And kind of where I want to go right now is get into, we'll call it a little bit of myth busting potentially, or validation. These could be true or untrue, but from your perspectives as courageous leaders, will say, let me get your thoughts on a couple different things. So first, and we'll take it from a myth busting kind of mentality here. So the very first one, and we'll just toss straight over to Joe, is professional service leaders just kind of stay in your lane and just deliver the projects that are sold, right? Just be as efficient and excellent as you can be in just delivering your projects. How does that sound to you? Is that something that you can get behind?
Very true. They may have not used the phrase, but I only ever heard it internally, right? And so I'm trying to advise sales, stay, just look, this is up to us. But guess what? When it comes to the customer, what lane are we talking about? Are we talking about the project delivery lane, the finance lane, the integration lane? Which lane? We cover the entire the horizon. We're not limited to when the services person is not seen by the customer to have any limitations. And it was described to me, it's funny because I lived it, and somebody actually said it to me, a mentor. She said, you know what? When you're blocked in a project at a customer site because of what the customer is having problems with, that's your problem. You may think it's their problem. That's your problem because you're not being successful. You better go help solve it. So it could be network problems, it could be missing software. So my question to you is, what is the lane of the services guy, right? Inside the company, yeah, I get it. Head of engineering, don't come and tell me how to write code. I could actually, but so the only people I would say that looking back at my relationships, finance people were the best. When I got into finance, poor finance people, they get to work weekends and late nights and stuff, and no one appreciates it. And I did. I appreciated it because they were the receiving end of our charges and invoices. That would let me play in their pool. But yeah, from the customer's perspective, there are no limitations from what we're supposed to do. So it's a myth.
Yeah.
False.
Yeah, Mahesh, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm trying to see what's wrong with staying in your lane. Well, what if, no, Joe, absolutely right. What if there was only one lane in the entire company? Then everybody is staying in the lane, right? And what if that lane is defined by, very measurable outcome that the company stands for? Something maybe around customer success, maybe something around customer referenceability, something around ROI, something, and then everyone is going through the same lane at different points in time, right? So if there's only one lane, sales is going through that lane and at different point in time, and then sales is handing off to pre-sales or sales engineering. But again, they are also swimming in the same lane, and then so is delivery, so is customer support, so is product, and all that stuff. I think, and this is something, to be honest with you, we are trying at ProVerse, which is the entire company is measured on same goals, right? And those goals are objectively measurable, which essentially creating the same lane. So I would say if a services leader is asked to stay in a lane, either that lane better be one lane for the entire company, or that lane be so well defined and so we talk about people, process, technology. Unless you get to a nirvana of process and technology, the lane cannot be multiples. And if there are multiple lanes, then I would say, as a services leader, as a customer success leader, business today is all about renewals. Business is all about total customer value. And when you are talking about those things, then I think it's hard to define the boundary of the lane.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that when you think about, if you use the customer as Joe, I really like what you said about the customer doesn't see your lanes, your internal lanes, like the customer's just experiencing. Everybody, and this is something we talk about here in the podcast, is there are more people making operational decisions for your services organization than just in the services team, right? Like there are salespeople, there are finance, there's professional services. All these folks are making miniature decisions on your people, your processes, your technologies. And if you wrap it around what's best for the customer, and everybody has the courage and the bravery to put up your hand and say, there's something in the front end of the process, in the sales side, that could be better for the customer. I think we all have a duty to say something. And once again, especially in professional services, because you are closest to the customer. Yeah, sure, sales is going to sell to the customer, but you're going to get in the trenches you're going to be deep in the trenches with your customers, and you've got a really good perspective the rest of the company needs to see and understand.
If anyone in your company is staying in their lane, they're probably creating a silo.
Mm, there it is.
Silos are probably a dirty word in most companies. So that
Yep.
would be my defense.
Silo and legacy, two dirty words Joe has already said on the podcast.
Not using them again.
Oof. All right. Let's go through one more myth, and then we'll kind of move along here. We'll do this a 1 minute response time. And there's plenty of time in your services organization to come up with what your AI strategy is going to be with your internal processes. Plenty of time out there. No rush. Let's wait and see what everybody else does. Mahesh, why don't you take this one on?
Oh man, where did you come up with that?
It's based on like the 30 or 40% of professional service organizations right now who are coming up with a strategy.
Yeah.
If you look at the research out there, TSA is a great one. It's about like 35, 40%. They're making plans.
Yeah. So, I think depending on who you talk to, some would say it's a myth and some would say, yeah, that's true, right? Depending on and who you talk to. But I think where it's really a myth is we haven't talked about one keyword that should be mentioned in the first minute of any conversation, which is AI, right? And I'm surprised that we went on this long without mentioning AI. But I think when we talk about the data and plenty of time, one part of what I see from the conversations is there is one part of the services leaders which is who wants to implement and adopt AI technologies. They are like very keen, right? And then they start peeling the next layer and they're like, oh yeah, I mean, AI could do miracles for us, but hey, AI itself is not a magic. I mean, it needs data. And what I don't have is data. Okay, so how do I get to the data? Well, Excel sheet is not a way to get data, and there's no way that I can ingest anything meaningfully into my engine. Okay, so what's next? Well, what's next is I need to figure out how do I acquire and organize the data in the first place as quickly as possible, as fast as possible, so that I can start, going back at the top of the funnel and start getting the benefit. Okay, how do I acquire and organize the data? Well, I need to implement the technology which supports my people and processes to automate what I need to automate in terms of, what we do is services quoting. What Joe does is PSA. But if I don't have the basics in place to acquire and organize the data, then as excited as I am about AI technologies, it's just not going to work, right? So, but then I see the other side also where, well, it's the tail of the dog, not head of the dog. And so services, oh yeah, I do have plenty of time. It can take its own course. It's not the acute problem. And I'm talking about those companies who are probably smallish in size. It's not, the problem is there, but it's not acute enough. It's not one of the top three and stuff like that. So I would say, yeah, it's half myth, half, probably reality.
All right. Joe, any thoughts on AI before we move
Yeah,
on?
I'll give you something very pragmatic. So remember, I mentioned I was at the TSIA conference, the Technical Services Industry Association. They meet twice a year. Everybody there in every presentation had an AI story. So if the myth is you have plenty of time, I would just say, well, it's kind of a bit late because everybody's ahead of you. Your competitors are ahead of you. They all had an AI story, and it was a story. I sat through some of the vendors, and one of them was interesting. AI is going to tell you what the risks are in your project. Okay. Another one was AI will tell you how to remediate a project that's gone bad. It's funny, wouldn't you want to have AI right up front to prevent? Anyway, good marketing. And we ourselves actually we don't call it AI, but we have machine guided advisory on resource management. We'll get into that later on. So I talked about that. So if you haven't incorporated it, that's fine, but please spend some time to begin formulating that strategy immediately. Because I used to get in front of the board, right? BOD, every now and again they bring me in to talk. Somebody on the board is going to ask you the question. hey, Mahesh, what's your AI strategy? You better have a really concise answer. And if your answer is, look, I looked around and we absolutely don't need it because I built this great silo. Okay, that's your answer. But think about it. No, it's a
Yeah.
myth. You don't have plenty of time. Give it some thought.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think we've talked about this before as well, Joe. It's not just, if it's not convincing enough for the betterment of your business, think about the betterment and longevity of your career. Uh, because once again, this is a train that's left the station. And if you want to be a leader in this field, you're going to want to familiarize yourself with how AI is going to be integrating into your systems, into your own personal workflows, whatever it's going to be. All right. So we'd be remiss not to dig into PSAs with Joe here, the luminary, the esteemed PSA principal at NetSuite. We really want to get your perspective, Joe, on what are some of the key approaches when it comes to people, processes, and technologies for the PSA. Such a critical piece of technology for professional services organizations. How should people be thinking about getting the most out of those PSAs when either first implementing or replacing and relaunching or evolving?
Yeah, I'm going to work backwards. No
Yeah.
matter how small the organization is, start with the technology, because that then creates that process and that methodology. When I first deployed, and I'll use the word, sorry, but I sell open air. I used open air.
Yeah.
I'm going to use, I'll try carefully on this call, not to sell my own product, but when I first deployed it, this was way back, we were forced to think about how we did things. Well, until then, we were just using heroic processes. Send people out, here's an axe, go cut down trees, whatever. And it was so enlightening as we deployed our PSA to have to think about it, like, are we going to go international? Are we going to have currency issues? All that? And what it put together, what methodology we want to use and what's going to be the process for executing a project. Then the people come in. So the technology as a PSA helped us define what we knew what we were doing, even though it was heroic. And now we bring in the people, and guess what? They work so well when they've got these guardrails. This is the process, this is methodology, and they just run with it. And it all just changed. It was a game changer when we brought the PSA in. So this technology was up front, not the other way around. And I'll never forget, I was giving a talk at the Open Air conference years ago, and I was sitting at a table with another couple of executives, and one of the other VPs, she made a comment that stuck with me. She said, I brought Open Air in for me. It's for me to run the business. I didn't bring it. Yeah, my people have to use it for project management and everything else, but I didn't bring it in for them. I brought it in for me because I had a bigger picture, which was all those projects. And so I'll say that to listeners here. The open air for the executive, the PSA, whatever you choose, is for you. Think about how your career is going to go and how dependent you are on it. And you're going to have a lot of objective views from project managers, the UI. I hear this all the time. The UI is going to look just like Amazon or just like Facebook. What difference does it make as long as you get your job done? So get the technology right, define your processes that fit in the technology, and put the people in it. Okay.
I like it. I like it. Mahesh, any thoughts on the PSA?
No, the expert here has covered. I cannot add anything.
Well, I like that, Joe. And what that really illustrates is there are few technologies that are so critical and so transformational that you start with the technology and then work your way into process and people. Right? Like a lot of times in business, or in your individual units, you want to think about, right, what are we trying to accomplish? And then let's evaluate a piece of technology that can help us get through 60% of our requirement, whatever it's going to be. But I think what you're saying with the PSA is it is one of those that is so critical, so crucial, you can actually build starting at the technology side and then build your processes into it. And there's an important distinction there.
Hey, look at it this way, just quickly. Would you think of hiring a top-notch head of sales and not give him a CRM? Just tracking all the spreadsheets. your
Yeah.
forecast. No, that's like 1980s.
Yeah.
You think of hiring a VP of finance and say, you know what, we're just using checkbooks. No, it's like it's not even conceivable. And yet
Mhm.
today, a lot of people are asked to run a services organization without a PSA. If I ever went out in the field, that would be a non-starter. Like, sorry, I'd make a pretty good case for it. So think of it that way. It's essential. And you know, since we're talking about CRM, of course, the quotation tool. I used Stone Age tools when I was running my PSA to do the quotations. And I remember them so well. I wish I had Provis then, because again, it's your process, it's your goals, and it's the visibility. Can't do it with a spreadsheet, can't do it on a whiteboard. You need a tool, and Provis brings that too.
All right. Well, hey, gentlemen, that was amazing, insightful, everything I could have ever wished for, and I think our audience will ever wish for. A couple key takeaways that I have is two dirty words, right? Joe's two dirty words: silos, people, process, technology. Watch out that you are not creating those silos, and legacy. Be internally aware enough to know if you're tying yourself to legacy or something disconnected from the rest of the process. Not good. So two dirty words. Those are my takeaways. How about you, Mahesh?
I'm going to say that's amazing. When we think of legacy, I just want to extend that. Don't think of or don't create legacy systems, but create your legacy, which has transformed the business, right? That's the legacy you want to be after, not the legacy systems you want to be after. No, absolutely. I think that's fantastic. My one key takeaway is really what Joe mentioned earlier. If you don't already have AI strategy in place, it's late for you. Get on it, right? It's no longer you can afford to sit on the fence. No longer you can be on the other side of the fence. You have to get on it now. The time is now, right? So that's really what you have to do.
All right, Joe, any last takeaway for the audience?
Well, services folks, you know, I remember when I brought OpenAir into a company, I'm not trying to say this to boast, as I said, I brought it in for myself, but it changed the way the company thought of things. We then brought in we started automating other systems. So the takeaway is, listen, go in and understand what are the processes you have in the company that require multiple people and that can be automated, and be the advocate for it. Because if you can succeed there, you're not just going to improve your own career, but you're going to change the trajectory of the company. You know, people understand, I've been in the industry a long time, obviously. New people come in all the time. They don't have these lessons that Mahesh and I are sharing today. They are naive about some of this stuff, and they think spreadsheets are great. So be the advocate and embrace the problem. You know, automate.
Love it. Love it. Well, thank you very much, Joe, for joining us. Really appreciate your time. Thank you to our audience for joining the Services Ops podcast. Don't forget, subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on social platforms. Forward to your colleagues. There's something in here for everybody. There's been some really great nuggets today that I think can really help your organization and yourself. So go out there and have fun being a fearless services operations leader.